most people that we approach have a firearm. So we become comfortable with that. I used to check hunters with my friend who was the chief of police. And one day he got in, he goes, I don't know how you do it, Wayne. I'm like, what do you mean? Everybody has a gun. That puts a normal police officer on edge. When he sees gun, in his mind, it's more of an alarm. And in a game warden's mind, it's not an alarm. It's normal. A lot of them, display their handgun too. What we start to read is body language and how they interact with us. I've told this story before. I almost pulled this trigger on a guy, and he had a big car and his trunk was open. And I got right beside him and I said, hey, what are you doing? Because he had a couple gas cans, and he just turns at me and he spins and he runs, he opens up, and I'm yelling at him, stop. As he opens up his driver's side door and he dives in for the center console and he spins on me. I have my gun out and I'm pointing at him and I'm taking up the slack in the trigger. And as he spins in the seat and kind of forces something out me, just like he would a gun. And it's a wall. I was a wreck.
Well, hey everybody, welcome back to the Hunter's Advantage podcast. Today we are joined by a special guest, Wayne Saunders, retired game warden from New Hampshire. How's it going, man?
It's going well, and you guys?
Fantastic. Living the dream.
Can't complain.
That usually means anything from life's terrible or it's absolutely incredible. I saw a thing on Instagram that was like a little decoder, and it was like when a guy says living the dream, it means I hate my life.
So it depends how they say it. You know what I mean? You got to read body language.
Another day in paradise. Yeah.
Hard to do that on podcasting.
Yeah, that's true.
So we just did your show. Shoot, it wasn't probably a week ago.
Yeah, like a week and a half ago. Yeah.
And we really enjoyed doing it. We always think we love the work that game wardens do. And you obviously have some really cool stories and a long decorated career. So we thought it'd be really fun to bring you on and kind of pick your brain. And so like we said, we appreciate you doing this. I think it's gonna be fun.
Yeah. And I appreciate you guys having me on. So learning about your podcast and listening to it, I've enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed your preamble where you talk about ethics, because ethics is so important in the outdoors.
Absolutely. So kind of speaking of you, I guess diving in kind of from the beginning, we'll start at kind of the genesis. Like how did you kind of get involved in just general outdoor life? Like have you been involved in it since you were a child, or how'd you kind of dip your toes in?
Well, it's funny you say that. Here's my sample book. So it's called A Cowboy in the Woods. So, and it's a children's book. It's probably the first game warden's children's book. And I wrote it in conjunction with Lindsay Webb, who's an outdoor educator. And it's kind of my story, but we kind of added a lot to it about meeting a game warden when I was 6 years old with my father while we were hunting. And as he checked my father, and we were in the middle of the woods, and this guy just steps out of nowhere. And it was very mysterious, and he had his Stetson on. And my father was sneaking up on a grouse that had just flushed. And I look back, and here's this guy in green with this, big man with a big cowboy hat on. And he just puts up his finger to his mouth, and he says, shh. He's waiting for my dad, to do something. And same thing I would do, 20 something years later. But, and then, the grouse doesn't flush again. And my dad turns around, and here's a game warden in the woods, and here's standing next to me. And after he checked his license and such and left, I said, Dad, who's that cowboy in the woods? And he's like, that's the game warden. And I'm like, I want to be that cowboy in the woods. So, so I wrote a children's book in conjunction with the outdoor educator, and the girl that actually did all the pictures and everything's a game warden's wife. So it's kind of game warden related. So available on Amazon. I hate to pitch that to you guys, but
Now you go.
That's the beginning of my story. Is that interaction at 6 years old had such an impact on me. I was 18 and working for an electrician. I was an apprentice. I was running a crew at 18 years old. I had a take-home truck. This guy wanted me, as soon as I get out of high school, he was going to have me, sell me half his business, like 49%, and we were going to go to town. And I'm drilling holes and, dirt, all the stuff's falling in my face. And I'm like, you know what? I know it's a good deal, but I've always wanted to be a game warden, and I can't let that opportunity go, because you only go through once. So we think you only go through once. So, got to do what you love, and do what you want to do. So, and that's the career choice I took. I went to the State University of New York at Cobleskill for fisheries and wildlife technology. Got my degree there. My son's actually there right now for canine training and management. So it's kind of neat. It's generational, and it's a great school, very agricultural based in central New York. So, but that's kind of my base. And then, I was kind of mentored by Sergeant Bryant. It was a sergeant for a long time. He retired as a lieutenant, but I started doing ride-alongs with him at age 15, and right up till I got hired with New Hampshire. And during that time, I was always trying to better myself as a game warden. So when I graduated college, I worked for the state of New York as an assistant forest ranger, hiked the Catskills, and then I went to work for the National Park Service, and I bounced around the country doing the National Park Ranger law enforcement jobs. So I started off in West Virginia, and a Yankee in West Virginia stands out a little. So I was a whitewater ranger there. I got hired to do actually narcotics and stuff like that. But there again, they realized that they couldn't put a Yankee out there because he stand out too much. So they were like, yeah, I think we're going to put you in as a whitewater ranger. And I learned how to whitewater raft and whitewater kayak and get the most adrenaline of my life through my blood. It was amazing. From that point, I went up to the Piles Islands National Lakeshore. I worked on Lake Superior. My patrol boat was a 25-foot whaler. I lived on Stockton Island for 10 days. Then I'd get 4 days off. That is probably the most scared I've ever been. I had to go pick up these biologists out on one of the outer islands, and we had 12-foot seas. And I'm going up. Oh, it was nutty. I go up on top of this wave, and then I surf down. And I was so scared. I didn't want to die alone, so I wanted to pick them up. So we regularly stayed together. So that was it. It was an awesome experience. I was as scared as I've ever been, for sure.
So that's basically like whitewater rafting on steroids.
Yes, it was. And surfing down those waves was just nutty. And you'd never see anything because you'd get up to the top of the wave, and it was just a gnarly day, and the wind was just blowing, and it was dark, and it was just, I'm running on instruments, and it's just like, if you're in a plane, you're running on instruments, you're hoping everything's going right. And it was. I eventually got to the lee side of the island. The lee side of the island had like 4 to 5 waves. I couldn't even get in close. The guys had to come out to me because I couldn't get in close enough to shore because the waves were just too heavy. And they got on the boat there, and then we brought them back. And then I worked at Assateague Island National Seashore down in Virginia and Maryland as a seacoast park ranger. And then I worked for U.S. Fish and Wildlife out in Washington and Oregon, Umatilla Refuges, as a wildlife refuge officer is what they were called back then. Now they're just a wildlife law enforcement officer uniforms. So that in a nutshell is my beginnings.
What? I don't know if that's good enough of a resume to have you on here, to be honest.
I know.
I'm still stuck on the Yankee narcotics. He's like, hey, boys, you have any weeds? You got anything?
I got in so much trouble just by opening my mouth there. I had to change a tire on the chief ranger's vehicle one day, and I went down to the garage, and I walk in there, and there's a whole bunch of older fellas, like you'd think, sitting around chewing the fat. I talked to the owner in there, and one of the old fellas says, how come a West Virginia boy can't have your job? And I said, well, he probably could if he went to college. And I'll tell you, the owner scooted me out back so fast, and he's like, I'm sorry. But, I was never one of those guys to step down. I was always the guy to step in. So, yeah. And that was, I wouldn't say it was a problem in West Virginia, but, it's one of those things you stand out, for sure. They actually put me with a guy that was a local to work with when I was in uniform, just so I wouldn't get in trouble. And checking fishermen one day, again, I was getting the attitude, and all of a sudden, Jim comes down, and they're like, Jimmy, is that you? What the hell did you do wrong to get stuck with a Yankee? It was just a culture there 30 years ago. I don't know if it's changed any. I have some good game wardens friends that are in West Virginia, but it was just a total different culture. And I'm really excited that I got to experience it and have those stories for sure. It was, and to be on the New River and paddle in the Gauley is one of the top 10 navigable bodies of water in the world. And I get to paddle that in a kayak. I learned all about whitewater. And like I said, probably the most adrenaline that's ever flown through my blood is down there. It was incredible. every weekend, whitewater rafting, whitewater kayaking, doing rescues in whitewater. The other thing they didn't, this never caught on with me, was climbing. It's known for, climbers. We have the whole gorge. It's just a big climbing mecca. We would have climbing accidents on a regular basis where we'd have to rappel down to the people and package them up and do vertical raises and such like that. So we get to train in that, and we get to do it. I tried rock climbing. It just wasn't me. I'm like, there's a reason you're not supposed to be climbing these things. So rappelling was fun.
Yeah, you're telling me I got to pull up my body weight? No, thank you. I'd rather float. But
yeah, by like your fingertips.
yeah, no,
No, thanks.
there ain't no way. There ain't no way. I think the only people that'd be good at like climbing with their fingertips are little keyboard warriors, online that just like to set their mom's base and stuff. Was like
strengthen it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they probably got some stout fingertips. But
yeah, they do.
Going back to the narcotics thing, I know we kind of touched on that already, but did you get any like busts before you got moved or no?
No, I didn't. I had a pretty sharp supervisor that knew that just wasn't going to work. And he switched me out with a local guy who was very, knowledgeable in whitewater. That's why they had hired him. And they were like, "Hey, Audie, would you be interested in doing this?" And he was extremely successful doing this stuff. He was finding marijuana grows. He was doing all kinds of stuff. And that was basically what they wanted me to go beat the woods and find marijuana grows on the national park. And he did an awesome job. The only other thing I did with them, we had the sheriff's department fly and located a bunch of grows, and then we would go in and we pick at stuff. So we did work with that. And I think everybody was on hands to do that.
So is that the only way you could really find like those marijuana grows, is just by aerial, or did you happen to be able to stumble upon those? Like,
No, Audie would actually go in the woods and find these things, and they would set up surveillance on them, and we had groundhog cameras back then, which are like cutting edge. And yeah, no, he did a lot of worked with the local sheriff's department, and just did an outstanding job. We as game wardens, I've done several things like that in my career in New Hampshire, where we found grows looking for illegal bear baits. To be honest with you, preseason bear baits, we stumble upon them pre-harvest time, and we've handed them over to state police, the drug task force, and they'll set up surveillance. And then when it gets close to it and they haven't got anybody, it's a pull day, and you pull all the plants and you take them all out. So, but I did have some experience with that.
It's interesting hearing you talk about that, because when I think about like national forests, a lot of these places that are hundreds of thousands of acres, I think about, illegal baiting or people poaching deer or stuff, but I guess there's a lot more nefarious uses that you can have for all this like huge ground, whether it's, even taking somebody's body out there using for this, or growing drugs, or what. I never really thought about that. Like, that's a lot of real estate for people that like to get into, the dark side.
Oh, 100%, Christian. It's funny that you say bury bodies, because that's exactly, we've had several cases and murders, and people try to dispose of the bodies in the wilderness area or remote areas. And when you think of game wardens or park rangers or anybody that works remotely, sometimes those are the people we run into, and it is kind of gnarly. And the drug world too, they set up these booby traps, so they know. People have been in there, and maybe it's a shotgun that goes off with a primer. You hit it, and it's a bang, and it's disabled. So in West Virginia, actually, they found traps that they actually pulled, which was interesting. So not so much in the Northeast that we found traps, but they definitely grow on public land, because usually the state or the federal government will seize the land if it's private land and you're growing on your private land. They'll seize that. So that's the attractiveness of growing on public land. I had one guy that we caught for something else, but he would take buckets, 5-gallon buckets, and he would plant the things up the tree. So he'd take a ladder and go up a tree and cut off a little branch and hook the handle on it, put it in there, and that's how they grew all above ground. So you really didn't see it. It was very unusual. I don't know if it was effective or not. We never caught him, but we found him, and it was just weird. We usually used black buckets, and there was a couple white buckets, which were odd. And then when we pulled them down, it was a pretty good marijuana tree growing, bush growing in it. So And then we started finding more and more. Pretty ingenious, I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
It seems labor intensive, but
I guess you got to get creative. I don't. That's insane.
it is.
So
They only
when
put
you,
your work into something good.
yeah. So you told us a little bit about your origin story and, how you kind of saw the cowboy in the woods with your dad at 6 years old. But would you say it was like more of a love for law enforcement or a love for the outdoors or a love for both that kind of got you into it? Like, did it skew either way, or was it just like, how did that happen for you?
Well, I grew up hunting and fishing. And, we weren't antler hunters by any means. We were meat hunters. We filled the freezer with deer. We would go down and fish, perch and panfish and stuff to, for food subsistence. And we would take roadkill growing up. Moose were just coming into the area. And if a moose got hit by a car and my dad get a call, we'd both get out. Me and my brother would have to get out of bed to go help. And so it was a real good connection to the outdoors growing up. And it kind of segued because of that interaction at 6 years old into, hey, why don't I do a ride along with the game warden? And then, just like you guys love to hunt deer, I watched the progression of what you hunt. And I still have this issue today, even retired, is you start hunting poachers or hunting bad guys. And it changes your prey is what it does. I found myself, teaching my son man tracking, this year when we were like deer hunting, hey, can this truck with, and then I caught myself. I'm like, I'm supposed to be teaching him deer hunting, not man tracking.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was a progression. I think it's both, growing up, hunting, fishing, and doing all those stuff. My uncles were kind of, they would poach on occasion. So my Uncle Warren would catch salmon through the ice, which was illegal, and he'd put them down his pants to get them off the ice, and all kinds of things. My dad always told the story of one night he shot a deer in the field, and the game warden was sleeping in the field. So my Uncle Warren ran into the swamp and ditched his gun into the swamp and spent the night in the swamp. Got out in the morning, got home, and the game warden was there like first light at the house because they knew it was my Uncle Warren. And started questioning him and never broke him. But my Uncle Warren had a real great appreciation for the game wardens. As a matter of fact, that same game warden that tried to catch him, when he was, in a nursing home and stuff, my Uncle Warren would go visit him because he had a respect for him, an appreciation for him. And when I became a game warden, both my father and my uncle were very, very proud. I went to my uncle's funeral in my uniform with my cruiser, and so many of his friends came up to me and said, "You know how proud your uncle was of you, that you became a game warden." And I do, because he had that respect for game wardens, and I don't think he poached after that. I know one of my other uncles didn't, and he told me, he said, "I would never put you in that position, now that you're a game warden. So I don't want to put you in that position. So I'm done. I'm going to be by the rules," which is, again, really refreshing. Yeah, I think that's cool.
So every family just has to have one game warden in it, and we end poaching problems because you don't want to arrest your family.
Maybe. Depends the family, doesn't it?
Yeah. Or they're like, cool, we can poach more. He's not going to take us in.
Yeah. I'll tell this story about my wife's uncle. I don't know if her family will appreciate it, but we were actually running a decoy deer, and her uncle didn't see it, but he threw a beer can out and almost hit my lieutenant with it. So for the next 2 days, I hunted him down, and I found him, and I found the same kind of beer cans in the back of his truck, and I wrote him a ticket for littering. And as I'm writing the ticket, he's like, "Oh, I think you're dating my niece." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure I am." So
That's even bigger.
And he got that ticket. So
That's hilarious. At least you didn't play no favorites.
yeah, my brother says I would arrested my mother when I started, and my mother says the same thing. So I guess it probably would have been true. And I think that's true with all young law enforcement. We start off in such a fury. And then as we get older, we get wiser, and probably not as, I wouldn't say effective, but we're different. And I always used to love when a young warden or a young police officer would come into town because maybe the things that you overlook, the local speeding, things like that, they did it. So there was somebody else in town, and it ebbed and it tied, and it would, every 10 years you'd get that, and it would knock down all the things that maybe you let go that weren't as important anymore as when you started. And you were looking at the total picture and not the details.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. But speaking on, being young, a relatively young game warden versus an experienced one, like first starting out, it had to be somewhat iffy when you went to, when you're first approaching people, because it's not like a regular cop, right? Like they could be on a routine traffic stop and pull over an old grandma, and they can go on the next one and it'll be a 6-time serial killer or whatever it may be. But when you're a game warden, you relatively know, even fishing related too, most of them probably have a gun on them. So what's that feeling like? And like, how do you go about approaching these individuals at first? And then I guess, how did you kind of morph into maybe not being so paranoid? Because if I think back on it, I feel like more paranoid, and then hopefully you get used to it. But also when you're getting used to it, how do you stay on guard, if that makes sense?
Yeah, great question. And I think we, as game wardens, interpret body language much better than your average police officer because we have to. So like you said, most people that we approach have a firearm. So we become comfortable with that. I used to check hunters with my friend who was the chief of police. And one day he got in, he goes, "I don't know how you do it, Wayne." I'm like, "What do you mean? Everybody has a gun." And that puts a normal police officer on edge. When he sees gun, in his mind, it's more of an alarm. And in a game warden's mind, it's not an alarm. It's normal. So whether it's a bird hunter, a deer hunter, a grouse hunter, a fisherman, lots of fishermen are armed. A lot of them, display their handgun too. It's not the thing, but what we start to read is body language and how they interact with us. I've told this story before. I almost pulled a trigger on a guy, and and I used to pride myself, and a lot of wardens pride on their stealth. And he had a big car, and his trunk was open, and I had pulled down the road. So, my cruiser wasn't even there, and I'd walked up the edge of the road, and I got in, and I got right beside him, and I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" Because he had a couple gas cans in the back, and he was just moving things around. And he just turns at me, and he spins, and he runs. He opens up, and I'm yelling at him, "Stop, stop, stop." As he opens up his driver's side door, and he dives in for the center console, and he spins on me. I have my gun out, and I'm pointing at him, and I'm taking up the slack in the trigger. And all I'm waiting for is to see that handgun in his hand before I open up on him. And as he spins in the seat and kind of forces something out me, just like he would a gun. And it's a wallet. And he wanted to show me his idea. He was a challenged individual. No malice in the guy. He instantly saw me and thought I wanted his ID, and just the way he reacted. And I was a wreck, to be honest with you, because I almost killed him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just like, that's fine. I don't care anymore. I just don't care. I was a wreck because I was taking the slack shot of that trigger, and I was just waiting to see a firearm. And I sympathize with police officers that I see when people pull their cell phones out and they shoot them, and people are like, "How can that happen?" And I'm like, "Oh, I know how that happens, because the perception is it's a gun, and you have to be ready if it's a gun. And if it's not a gun, you have seconds to stop, or seconds to act." And yeah, so I was a wreck, and I didn't care what he did. I didn't even look at his license. I'm like, "You're all set." And he really wanted me to see it, and he kept, and he was a challenged individual. Like I said, no malice in the man. He just spun and thought instantly, I got to show him my ID. And just the way he reacted was just, yeah. So that's one of the things. So that's reading body language. I think any officer probably would have done that. But most of the things with game wardens, most of the people we interact with, 90% of them are great people. They're honorable people. They know how to handle firearms. Sometimes that's, I've chewed out more people about handling a firearm than anything, because sometimes you go to check them. And I always appreciate when you see them approaching, they'll unload their gun. Sometimes they'll set it down. If they just unload it, leave the action open. So good to do when you interact with a game warden, because accidents don't happen. So we had an officer in New Hampshire shot, and they still don't know if it was intentional. And this happened probably 50 years ago, or intentional or unintentional, but it was a discharge among a group of hunters, and they hit him right in the leg, and he actually lost a piece of bone. So 30-06 hit him in the leg.
Oh.
And he lived to talk about it. His one leg was shorter than the other. Warren Jenkins was his name. And that guy wasn't charged or put into jail. I think the finding came out that they couldn't determine the intent, and it was more of an accident than they thought it was, intentional. I believe was the outcome. But again, was that poor gun handling? Was he mad at him and wanted to use that as an excuse? When I was in the woods, especially hunting or something, I always like to wear my orange. I always tell used to tell my guys, if you find me dead, it's a homicide. Just look at my orange. This is what I wear. And it's because I investigated so many hunting related shootings that should have never happened. Never, ever happened. Fatals, non-fatals. It was just, lack of wearing hunter orange, lack of communication. Maybe if you're bird hunting or rabbit hunting, where you are, keeping in that constant contact. Yeah, it was, yeah. So I think to answer your question, I think it's body language. We learn to read that. One of my podcasts, an investigator out of Illinois, Jeff, and I can't remember Jeff's last name. So anyways, he was a really good trainer, and he used to do a study. He'd actually mark down, and if I tell you guys this, everybody's going to do it now, but the wave, he called it. So he'd go to check a fisherman before he got there. He could see him down at the river. He'd wave at him. If they waved back, generally there was nothing wrong. If they didn't wave back, 90% of the time there was an issue. So, and he used to keep the data, wave, no wave, incident. And he actually has the data on that experiment, the wave. And I did a little podcast about the wave with him after we did Jeff Bailey, I think. Yeah. So at Illinois, and it's just interesting stuff. He did interview and interrogation training for, all kinds of warden groups, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and traveled around doing his training. And again, it was learning that body language, how to interview people, how to phrase things and things, kind of like you guys did, when you're interviewing guests.
Mm-hmm. So did you learn a lot of that stuff in your game warden training? Because you obviously said you went to undergrad, and then is it just a separate school or training after that you learn all that stuff?
Is it kind of like the cleat, or do game wardens have to take the cleat as well?
And I'm not familiar with that terminology, but I'm assuming it's like a law enforcement academy.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yes. So I started off in law enforcement ranger school in Sylva, North Carolina, and I did a 10-week course down there. That was great. That gave me the qualifications to do the seasonal law enforcement for the National Park Service. And then when I came to New Hampshire, I did another 10-week program. It was supposed to be 12 weeks back then, but because of my previous experience, we did 10. And and then I went back out into the field. We do a year in New Hampshire of field training. So you're with an FTO, field training officer, where you're learning a lot of the nuts and the bolts. But the real learning comes in after you're placed, I think. In the first 5 years of a guy's career is so focused on that learning. It's amazing. I don't think anybody seasons until 5 years. So,
wow. So when you first got into the field, what was one of your biggest challenges that you first realized?
Going into my lieutenant's patrol and filling those shoes. Yeah, that as a young game warden, that was an achievement to try to go, especially when your lieutenant still lives there and he tries to direct you. and make you do things that he wants you to do, but he doesn't want to tell you to do that. He wants to try to have you figure it out on your own.
Listen, guys, we wouldn't be able to do the podcast if it wasn't for you all. So we just want to say that you guys are greatly appreciated, and thank you for following along each week.
And speaking of support, we are partnered with Out on a Limb Manufacturing, and I can tell you from firsthand experience, Matt and Chase are great, down-to-earth guys, and they make some of the best saddle hunting products out there. Whether you're looking for a set of climbing sticks or a mobile, lightweight, hang-on tree stand, or maybe you're even a one-sticker.
You mean tree Pilates?
Yes, tree Pilates. If you've been to the grocery store or the gas station lately, you know that Uncle Joe is doing his absolute worst to take all your money. That's why we need hunting gear that lasts year after year. And trust me, I've been rocking the same Out on a Limb Shakar climbing sticks for 4 years and the Ridge Runner 2.0 saddle hunting platform for a few years as well. This gear is built to last.
We can confidently say that Out on a Limb is the best bang for your buck.
And it's the best gear if you want to deflate a big old buck.
Ooh. Make sure you use code HNTA15 at outonalimbmfg.com for 15% off anything on their website.
So if you can show them the same support that you guys show us, please go to outonalimbmfg.com and use code HNTA15 for 15% off at checkout. Now let's get back to the podcast.
And sometimes you figure other things out on your own. And my lieutenant used to tell me, he's like, every time I'm ready to rip your head off, Wayne, you pull a rose out of your ass. True statement. So I like pulling those roses out. That was a challenge working for my lieutenant, Eric Stoll, and making him happy. I think I achieved that, down the road, but it certainly as a new guy, that was a challenge.
So you're in New Hampshire. So what would be probably your most ticketed item? Was it more wildlife side, or was it just, speeding? Because you guys probably have like snowmobiling and stuff there, right?
We do.
So what would be, your most ticketed item, you think, between the two?
Oh, I think you hit the nail on the head is snowmobile speeding.
Actually.
In the winter, we are troopers on snowmobiles. So we do DWI arrests, we do snowmobile accidents. We have a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit. We usually don't write it till 60. And I bet that's in my career, that's probably the most ticket I wrote was, speeding on a snowmobile.
Really?
Yeah, one weekend, 3 of us wrote 105 tickets. It was
oh my God,
Snowdio weekend. And we would set up a radar gun down the trail, and then we'd have a couple officers catching them. And the other guy would radio the speed of a whole crew. So there'd be, 5, 6, 7, 8 sleds. And we had a guy writing, and he'd be calling out the numbers, and they'd write, and we'd stop them in that order, and we'd write them all down through. We could always write unreasonable speed too, because if they were exceeding the speed limit, we didn't have to actually give a number to it. So we could do that if we lost, track of who's who, or they parked somewhere different with just all for unreasonable speed.
I'm with you.
Yeah, because that was definitely. I hate to say it because I'd love to tell you, I caught my share of poachers, and I loved catching night hunters. That's one of my favorite things to do. And usually catch 1 or 2 or 3 a year, depending the year. I think I went dry 1, maybe 2 years in my whole career, but there was other years I had 3 or 4. So I always say that, at least I racked up at least 1 illegal night hunting case a year.
What is it that you find fun, like particularly fun about night hunters? What they're catching them?
Again, it's adrenaline. It's nothing like seeing a muzzled flash at night. That you shoot a gun at night so you can understand what I'm talking about. There is probably 3 or 4 feet of fire that comes out, depending the firearm, comes out of that thing, and again, your adrenaline just takes off because the chase is on now. They just shot. Could be your decoy. Let's say it's your decoy, and now you got a chase vehicle, you got guys on the ground, now you probably got videotaping. So the game's on, you got to pin them in. And you have seconds to do this stuff too, to get up on them and to trap them so they don't get away. And it is, for a warden, it's so adrenaline filled, it's crazy. I mean, you're running up on guys with guns that are just shot, actually. So
Yeah, and they probably don't know what the heck's going on, seeing
You're
people run out.
game warden, drop your gun. Yeah, you're yelling commands. The chase vehicle's hopefully almost there. The blue lights are going. Yeah, it's adrenaline for them too.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
it can be intense.
I can imagine. How does something like that work? Like, how do y'all set up a decoy, and like, what's the strategy and thought behind, like, because I'm sure you have to place it in the right spot on the road where it's still being able to seen, which would, I think, be kind of difficult. Because if you do anything around here, at least my truck's headlights, they're not the best, and so you'd probably have to get it relatively close, but not so noticeable where it's almost obvious.
Yeah, and you'd have to be looking. That's the other thing. And laws across the nation vary on shining and not shining during the open deer season. The nice thing about New Hampshire is we don't have a shine. You can't shine during the deer season. It's shut down, so no illuminating at night. So that's nice. So so you got to get the guy that's looking. And then, to be honest with you, information is priceless. So if you find out, somebody's operating in an area, you can set up in that area. And if they are operating that area, they're going to probably, if you put it in a place where the white-tailed deer is frequently, they're going to probably look there for white-tailed deer, and they're going to shine your decoy because they're looking. We're not looking for the guy that's driving by and sees it. Although I will say, coming out of the woods, the last hour was one of my favorite times to get people, especially in big woods, because they've been hunting all day long. They're probably tired. They're coming out. They get lazy. They see a deer and they act. They don't care anymore because they've been all day hunting. They're tired. They're wet. And all of a sudden there's a buck. And I don't know how many guys I've caught doing that. Just, yeah, bang. And it's just easy. And they're the opportunists. So you have your career poachers and then you have the opportunists. And those guys are the opportunists. Are they going to go out looking at night for a deer? Probably not. But when they see a deer coming out after all day hunting and they see it, then, maybe it's 30 minutes after dark. Oh, that's not really dark. I can say I shot it 30 minutes ago or an hour, and I was always that golden hour after the legal limit stopped. And, that was the opportunist. And that's when we get the opportunists. Every now and then we'd get morning opportunists. So we'd set up for the morning going in. So there'd be a deer or a decoy in the field and they'd see it. Moonlight nights were awesome for that because, they stand out so good. All of a sudden they're driving down on moonlight night and they look over in the field and they're silhouetted is this big buck and they are like, holy crap. And then the game's on. But the other guy, the legal guy, is going to pull over and wait, shut off the truck, and he sits there until legal time. And then he goes out and starts looking. The deer is no longer there, I will tell you that. But that happens. It happens probably more than we get shooters, for sure. I mean, it sounds like we get a lot of shooters. We really don't for the amount of time we put in, the amount of shooters we get. No, we don't. But we do get quite a few legal guys. I ran a moose decoy, and I feel bad. It was a big bull. It's a piece of plywood. It's cut out a silhouette of a moose, and going in, the guy silhouettes it with his headlights, and he parks down the road, and he's waiting. And about 10 minutes before legal shooting, I walk up to him, and I knew him. And I said, hey, he's like, oh, there's a big bull back in that cut. I'm like, yeah, no, there isn't. He goes, no, I saw it, Wayne, coming in. I saw it. So I'm waiting, and I'm like, yeah, no, it isn't. And all of a sudden it dawns on him that it's fake. And he was angry. And I get it because he now is out of position. He's out of position because of that decoy. It was just one of those things, Could someone have come in behind him and shot it? Yeah. So we didn't want to blow it. So we let it ride. But then he was out of position come first light, which he wasn't very happy about. And I get it. Yeah. But it's just part of it. Unfortunately, I wish I could, make sure everybody's there, but I can't.
I couldn't imagine the adrenaline rush of exactly where that decoy is. You see the lights start to silhouette it, and you're watching the interest progression through somebody's brain. They're like, ooh, hold on, 10-point turn, and then they get their lights on it. And you're like, come on, that's that moment of anticipation. Just that gets my hair standing up on my arms thinking about it.
It's kind of like fishing. You put your bait out, and then you just kind of get a nibble. That car driving by starting to slow down, and then it's just whether they take the bobber under or not.
Yeah, and that thing you just described, one time I'm sitting there and I'm getting ready. I got my hand on the key and my foot ready to go, and my foot hits the brake and a brake light comes on.
Oh,
and,
no.
Oh my goodness. And I like instantly quick it off, and they still shot the deer, but I was like freaked out, because I mean, you have to be fast to be on it. So, and that way I was actually seeing it too. And, so I was the chase vehicle, but I was in proximity, so I could watch this whole thing go down, which was incredible. And you just described what I saw. And like you said, that anticipation is just, it's out of control. And, you're waiting to hear that gunshot and seeing that flash. And I did that time. And that's what's great. And it's that anticipation for hearing that. And when it happens, it's an adrenaline dump, and it's game on, and I'm turning that key. I'm in it. I'm shoving that down and off the go. So, I was using another officer's, cruiser one day, and, I was the chase vehicle, because usually the senior officer is the chase vehicle. He doesn't get the fun anymore to be on the ground. There was only 2 of us that day. And I'm using his vehicle. I'm talking to another officer that's off duty on the phone, and I hear the gunshot. I drop the phone and I start the vehicle, and my cruiser is disabled, so I didn't have to touch the brake to shift. And I am trying to shift this thing. I'm surprised I didn't bend that thing. I couldn't get it into gear. And I am like, what the heck? What's going on? And all of a sudden it dawns on me. So I hit my foot on the brake and I get it in gear. And I just lay friggin' furrows down to get there. And then when I get there, I can't see the officer. There's one guy out, and I don't see the officer. And I get out of there, and I got my gun drawn. I'm like, where is the officer? Where is the officer? Because I don't know now. And Mark yells, Wayne, I'm right here. And I'm like, okay. So now it levels down, because I get up there. I can see one guy, and I don't see my officer. And I'm like, I don't like that at all. That just, again, I want to make sure my guy's safe, and I don't know if he's safe at this point. So once I know he's safe, then we're good. So that's, but that was one time I caught me off guard, and because we weren't too far into it, and and the other officer had listened to the whole incident on the phone, because I dropped the phone. It was on the bottom down near the pedals, and I never hung up. So he heard me yelling, "Where's the officer?" Then he got a play-by-play on the phone, which was pretty fun. So
at least he knows that you at least were attempting to have his back. So that's worth something at least. But what's people's reactions typically when you catch them at night? Do they kind of just basically throw their hands up and be like, "Well, I'm screwed," or did the majority of them try to like cut their lights and run?
We've had both. The majority of them are caught right there. We try to set up so we don't like runners. So we set up the few guys that tried to run. One guys, they had it in rear gear before I got them in, and I thought my cruiser was going to get smashed, but they were stuck in the mud. They'd come in and it was real muddy, and they tried to accelerate so much that dumped it right down. They cut themselves furrows, and they weren't going anywhere. But they tried. And that was a little further away than normal. But when I got in there, the reverse lights, and they were smoking those tires, but they were stuck. Had they got out easily, they might have been okay and got out. And they were really close. So they were really close to the Vermont border. We were working really close to the Vermont border. That would have been a pain in the butt if they had crossed the state lines there. But we wouldn't have stopped the pursuit, but it's just nicer and cleaner when they stay in our jurisdiction.
Yeah, that makes sense. Something I'm curious about especially about the decoys. You've heard that quote, big deer make people do stupid things. And so I would wonder the success rate of like a basket rack fake decoy, of like success rate of people pulling down to shoot at it versus like a big monster. Is that something that you guys consider when you're putting out the decoy? Because there's probably some pretty straight arrowed folks that are like, that's too big of a deer. I have to risk it. I have to try.
100%. The nice thing is we took antlers. So they send you these fake antlers that are kind of cheesy. So we always used to take the real antlers from cases that we had in the area, and we would make those fit in there. So it was a representation of the deer in the area. So it wasn't ginormous. They were nice rack deer. And we had a set of spikes for them too, because occasionally we'd throw a spike because, I mean, there's no way a game warden is going to run a spike decoy out there, and would get people out there. Occasionally would run a doe and a buck. The buck in the background, the doe up front, and we mixed it up so people can't see the same thing. And I always said, we'll stop using them when people stop shooting them, which is it just amazes me how many people shoot them. It's crazy.
I can't imagine the poor fellow that shot the spike. He's like, no.
That's reverse psychology is what that is. It's like, oh, there ain't no way.
Yeah, the worst one is the coyote decoy. We'll throw the coyote decoy out, and everybody wants to kill a coyote.
Okay.
And there's a good way to kill a coyote and a bad way to kill it. Get off the road. New Hampshire is 15 feet off the road, and you can usually whale at a coyote. But when they're shooting out the window at the coyote, when they're shooting from the road at the coyote, those are the types of things we would get. And everybody would be mad. It's just a coyote. It's not the coyote you're getting the ticket for. It's shooting from the road. It's shooting from your vehicle. Those are the violations. It has nothing to do with the coyote.
It's just the law.
Yeah, and they would get mad at that we used a coyote, which again, it's just mixing it up, because if we always used the deer, no one would shoot at the deer. I had Johnny Johnson. I always remember this. I checked him hunting one day, and I usually checked him opening day of muzzleloader season for us, and he was different this day, and he was really depressed. And I'm like, hey, Johnny, can I check your license? Yes, Mr. Saunders. I'm like, something wrong, John? He goes, yeah. He goes, I was down in Keyser's Meadow, and I thought you had your decoy out there. And he goes, so I walked up, and I kept walking. I got 20 feet from the buck, and then it started running.
Oh.
and he got a shot off, but it wasn't a very good shot. But he was trying to walk up to the decoy and make fun of it, and it wasn't a decoy at all. And there's a lot of those stories out there. I remember, I'd go to the restaurant, midday or something. Oh yeah, you were running your decoy down, and so. I'm like, yeah, and we weren't even there. So that was a real buck he saw. Yeah.
With kind of the rise in tech in hunting, we got cell cams everywhere. People have, I had a landowner flying a thermal drone over me on public this year, making sure I wasn't poaching off his place. Like, what do you think that poaching is less prevalent today because of technology, or is it just people kind of changing their approach, like just road hunting now, or what?
It's different for sure, Christian. It's different. And I think poachers are changing the tactics, and game wardens have to change their tactics. Thermals are becoming affordable. I mean, when a thermal was $5,000, $10,000, not too many people had them. Now that they're $1,000, a lot of people have thermals, and we're noticing when trucks slow down in fields and there's no lights to come out, and then they move on. I'm pretty sure the thermals are coming out, and they're just swiping that field, and they're seeing a truck blowing in the field, and they're just moving on because it's the game warden sitting there, and they're just cruising on over. So I think thermals are a big thing. Poaching is changing, and it's not changing. So, and what scares me is, some of these rulings that are coming in, the game wardens can't go on posted property, because if I get 200 acres and I post it all, I put a big bait pile in the middle, I guess that's a license to poach to me. We've always not been able to go on the curtilage without a warrant, but we've always had the open fields concept where, posted or not, and our law says that, posted or not, we can go in the performance of our duties, which is, I think, really important, because wildlife roams private, public. It doesn't know the difference. So if we're going to manage these animals, we need to be able to go on to these areas to do that, because they're technically a state animal, regardless of their location. So if you want to, put up 200, posted signs around your area, and then fence it maybe 25 feet high or something, so nothing else can go on it, and maybe cap it so your birds can't fly in it, because that's what's happening. I think is that, and the nice thing is about poaching. There's two kinds of poachers. They're braggers, and others that do it for money. So usually money is a financial gain, or you want the bragging rights. If you just want to fill your freezer and don't tell anybody, you're going to probably be pretty damn effective. So that's the nice thing that we can probably catch, because we're going to get information about those. But that's what worries me, is that you can post all your land and the game warden can't go on there. And we're starting to see that Tennessee has a lot of restrictions now on private land. And it's not even fair to people that hunt public land. What was the game warden just going to, police public land and check you guys 5 times a day or something? It's crazy. So a lot of states have upheld that we can go on, in the performance of our duties, go on posted land or not. The curtilage is still respected. I actually was following a blood trail one time. The guy had illegally killed something and had it on his ATV. And I got to the curtilage and I stopped, and I could see the ATV in his barn. But I went and I stopped there and I went and got a search warrant, because the curtilage is that maintained area around your house, so to speak, whether it's outbuildings, the area you mow, maybe it's fenced or something. That's the curtilage of a building. And that is, sacred. Absolutely. We need a search warrant to go there. So I went and got a search warrant, and I was issued a search warrant, and we did a search warrant that night, and I got an illegal night-headed deer that night too, based on information too. Someone heard a shot at night and reported it, and I investigated, and this is what I found. And we were able to execute that and make that case. But I stopped where that maintained property. The nice thing is I could still look in there and see the ATV, where the ATV tracks go. I already documented blood and hair. So, in the search warrant, the judge would guess, you're going to find, a deer and all this other stuff. So I connected that, and that's how it's supposed to work. If I wasn't able to go on that private property, I would have never made that case. And then how many other cases like that aren't going to be made? It's not fair to our general population, the people that, hunt and fish, that, that other people that have large tracts of land can now have a license to poach.
I've never really considered that. Is that, I'm assuming that's different state by state. Every state has their own implementation of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. And we have to go by our state. Usually goes up to the state Supreme Court and makes a ruling. And like I said, Tennessee has had a ruling where they can't go on posted private land. Other states have been able to hold it. Ohio, Pennsylvania have been able to upheld the open fields doctrine so far. So that's good. And I get where some of it comes from is, they think the Constitution is the right of search and seizure. So, and they extend that right of search and seizure to your property boundaries. If there's no state animals on that, I'm okay with that, because I don't need to go there. If there's an animal that is being regulated by the state, managed by the state, and it has access to that private property, then I need to have access on there to make sure those regulations are being followed. Do I need access to a curtilage? Absolutely not. That's your area. I don't need to do that.
So what if you get like a tip or something, or, regardless if that's just a jealous neighbor that you shot his target buck and he's pissed, like, are you still able to try to investigate that on his land if it's posted, or just completely rule it out?
Well, if he's the complainant, then I'm sure he would give you permission to go on his property to investigate it.
Right. I'm mainly talking about the neighbor who is, calling and complaining about the other neighbor, like there's poaching going on his property. Like he's going out there at night and shooting.
He's going to have to give you specific information, so you're going to be able to generate a search warrant in those areas that are restricted. So, and that's where information, my career, I was very involved with our Operation Game Thief that turned into poacher tip programs. And information is key. I will tell you, the best cases game wardens make are based on information, especially divorces. I got some ton of information on divorces. The wives are more than willing to tell about their husbands and what they poached and what they didn't. great cases out of situations like that. I hate to say it, but
That sucks.
yeah, it sucks for them for sure.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Yeah, but information is key, and you need to develop that information in order to do your job. Can you still do it? Absolutely. Is it a little more difficult? 100%. Because now you have to get the judges involved to say you have enough probable cause to do this. So, and it's usually in the form of a search warrant.
Yeah. I totally understand it from like the private, access
Right.
standpoint. It's like I want the sovereignty of my property and infringement upon people going on the place. But it is different when it's a shared resource. Like there's nothing that frustrates me more than when someone shoots a deer and it goes over property bounds and they say, "Can I retrieve it?" And they say no. Absolutely not. And you're like, well, I know it's for sure dead. Can I go retrieve it? And there's a lot of folks that would go, no. I'm so prideful. I do not want. I would rather the deer spoil than you come on my private property.
Yeah.
Now, and I know there are some states that have that. I can't name one, like Oklahoma. If they say no after you ask just the landowner, you can call a game warden, and then he has to escort you, on that property. But how? Let me think how to word this. What is that feeling like when you're going on to a property that maybe isn't posted, that you're kind of investigating or patrolling or whatever you're doing there? Is it not a little iffy or I guess nerve-wracking at first? Because we've had experiences, just fishing creeks and stuff. Now, granted, we weren't trespassing, but it felt like we were getting shot at one time. And it's like there's a lot of people I feel like that would just shoot at sound. And, our instance, it happened to be just coyote hunters in the area. But, in your instance, it's like you're already trying to be stealthy and not be known. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I never really had. Usually, if we're on a property, there's a reason. Even the stuff, illegal bear baiting, preseason bear baiting, we're checking a lot of areas, but the areas we're checking, we kind of have, whether it's information or things that we've gathered, we don't just, willy-nilly walk on areas. We usually have a reason to be there, and even if it's just our instinct. So it's not, I don't think I've ever had that. I mean, we had one where we hiked in a mile at night and illegal bear baits, and that's unnerving going into a bear bait that, get the black bears around you, and we're setting up stuff. We're setting up cameras, and it's pretty stealthy. You're trying to stay, blacked out, no lights, and navigate a mile through the woods, get to this spot so you can, put up cameras, check cameras, pull information, document things, and then during the day as well. And certainly they were coming around. I could hear the ATV coming, stuff off in the woods and wait for the ATV to go by as they're preseason baiting their baits. So sometimes you're right there when they're doing it, which is great. But I don't get, shooting at noises or stuff. I've never had to do that. I've had to identify myself as the game warden because, like, when we're working a decoy, sometimes we're in total camo. So I try to, as we approach people, identify myself, and I usually try to pull my camo up so you can see my badge, see my uniform underneath. I had a gun from a guy after he shot, and he turned to me, and I grabbed his firearm at the same time, and I had already identified myself numerous times as a game warden, and I kind of tried to take his gun to make sure it was safe and stuff, and it was probably going to be evidence. I think he gave that one back, but he like pulled it back, and I'm like, game warden. And all of a sudden you could see the comprehension in his eyes. And he was like, but in the instance, I mean, we've had people, one guy shoots the decoy and we spring the trap, but the next guy shoots when we're standing next to them. They haven't comprehended, they're in that zone, they see that deer. And we've already yelled, identified ourselves, and we're coming out of the bushes. And the second guy shoots, and you're just like, really? But they're in that zone.
Yeah, they're in that tunnel vision state.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I would assume, we've talked about a little bit about cell cameras and, how obviously people are leveraging the ton to kill deer more and more effectively, probably other game
100%.
too. Is it something that kind of game wardens are adding to their bag of tricks? I feel like that's real time information you could use on cell cams these days to probably catch some folks doing stuff, right?
Oh, 100%. We're using trail cameras just as much as the hunters are because, it's good. It can give us the cellular stuff, tells us when the poacher's in there, tell us when the hunter, there's illegal bait there.
If you guys are anything like us, you love being in the deer woods and chasing big bucks. But there's another part of you that has that itch to chase other big game species.
If you've ever dreamed of chasing black bear, mule deer, or moose, Alberta, Canada is the land of opportunity for these adventure-style hunts.
Each year, hundreds of first-time visiting hunters from around the world come to Alberta for the options, quality, and accessibility that the land offers.
With over 1,800 Boone and Crockett entries and endless possibilities of taking multiple species on a single trip, Alberta is truly a paradise for a big game hunter. This is why we partnered up with the Alberta Professional Outfitters Society. To check it out, go to apos.ab.ca and click Find an Outfitter. From there, you can browse all the different big game species and hunting styles that fit with what you want out of the hunt.
Or you can send a free hunt inquiry through the Follow the Lead tool, and the outfitters who have what you are looking for will reach out to you directly.
So make sure to check out apos.ab.ca to learn all about hunting in Alberta and get connected to the right outfitter for you.
It just tells us when he's there so we can go in and catch him. It's catching evidence for us. They're extremely good tools for us at this point in the game, for sure. One of the officers in New Hampshire, Ron Arsenal, just set up a camera on a barway for turkey season. Knew the turkeys were in there. He knew hunters would be in there. So he got a hunter going in and he got a hunter going out with a turkey, and the hunter never registered the turkey. So he knew the hunter who it was. He could identify him through the photo.
Yeah.
Was he trying to catch that? Absolutely not. He just thought, hey, this would be a good spot and to check to see if guys are registered turkeys. And that guy didn't register the turkey, and it was pretty easy case based on a barway gap where the guys are coming, going in and going out from turkey hunting. And this guy comes out with a turkey and never registers it. So, really, really good case. And just, I guess, fishing, so to speak. And that one wasn't any fancy one. It wasn't a cell phone camera. It was one he retrieved and looked at the data, looked at the pictures coming and going. And yeah, for sure.
So I'd like to transition a little bit and talk. Obviously, there's a pretty famous, pretty significant story of an officer involved shooting that you were a part of, and if you're comfortable with it, I'd kind of like to hear that story. I've read several articles about it, but can you tell us about that incident?
Yeah, sure. I was a young officer, about 2.5 years on already. And the call came out for a stolen state police cruiser. And I started heading north, and I encountered that state police cruiser as it crossed over into the state of Vermont. And I wouldn't say I pursued it because I did turn on my lights initially, but someone had yelled to turn off my lights. And so I had turned off my lights. And basically the guy that had already killed 2 troopers, a judge, and an editor for the News and Sentinel, Dennis Jose, who tried to stop him, was on the other side of a bridge abutment, a railroad bridge abutment, in that cruiser and set up an ambush for me. So when I kind of snuck under there, because I came to a crossing and I could tell that he couldn't go any other way. I should have seen him. And I looked down near this railroad abutment. There only has room for 1 car to go in. You can see that dirt hanging in the air like someone just pulled off to the side. And there's a dead end road just on the other side of that I was aware of. So I figured he scooted up that dead end road to try to hide. Well, he didn't scoot up that dead end road to hide. He was ready for me, poised. He had a Stetson, the trooper hat on. It was poised at the back of the cruiser. And when I saw him, he pulled the trigger and hit me, and actually hit me in my badge. Hit me in my badge, went into my bicep and exited my shoulder. I threw it in reverse, actually slow. My adrenaline didn't dump at that point. There's a store called the Banvilles there, and it was a nice summer hot day, and there was a lot of people outside, whether they were eating ice cream or enjoying it. And I yelled at them to get out of there because this was going on. And I started taking more rounds into my truck. I think I took a total of 7, one that hit me, and 6 rounds that were pretty much clustered in my driver's seat. I always tell the story, and I always anticipated. I learned the difference between cover and concealment. And cover, when I was down in North Carolina, behind your rims or your tires are good cover, behind the engine block are good cover. So they always used to tell us to get down behind those things that, bullets will have a harder time penetrating. And I tell this story because you never know where you're going to learn things from. So we were doing felony stops in North Carolina. And I always despised some of these ladies. This one woman, she probably weighed 300 pounds. She worked for the sheriff's department. And she had lipstick on. She had lots of makeup on. And she used to smoke these Virginia Slims. Very narrow things. And she was kind of someone I didn't look up to at all. So on this felony stop, I got out behind the car, and she came over and she hip checked me. This is a big woman. She sent me flying. It was tar. And I spun my, you guys can see it, can't you? Yeah. I scud all my forearms got all scun up on the tar. And then she yells, she gets in my face and she tells me I'm dead. I'm blank dead. You're blind. And I can smell the cigarette, just breath coming out of her, screaming at me. But I will tell you, from then on, I never got out behind cover, and I learned cover. And I will say, that lesson probably saved my life that day, because I knew what cover was and not to get out from behind it. And so I tucked down as far as I could and put it in a reverse. And then my adrenaline dumped, and I stepped on it, and I laid some rubber down, and I was heading towards the Connecticut River, which is New Hampshire. But I hit this big old tree. And I snapped that thing, and the thing stopped me. I would have launched myself probably 20 feet in the air, and I don't know where I would have ended up in the middle of the Connecticut River. But that tree stopped me, and it hung my cruiser down. And my left arm was no good. It wasn't working. So when I opened the door, I fell like 20 feet down to the river bottom. And I kind of sneaked up along the way. And there was a bunch of raspberry bushes right along the side. And I took my handgun out, and I was ready. I figured he was going to come and try to finish the job. And, I'm like listening to my breathing, and it's so loud. And my handgun is so slippery. If you ever put some vegetable oil sometime on and then try to hold a handgun, and that's what it was like. It was blood all over my hands, and it was just so slippery to hold on to a handgun. But I'm trying to, put that on the ground, so if he comes, I can get a good sight picture and open on him. And I'm thinking to myself, he's got to get close. I got a handgun. He's got a rifle. And then nobody came, and I started hearing my name being yelled. So I dropped down. I went up along the river's edge, and I popped up in this backyard where I met another police officer, Steve Breton, who then commandeered a vehicle because he was with somebody else, and they were going to continue to pursue him. He took me to the hospital. Then I was flown out to Dartmouth. So, and then it was a year process. But, 2 of my friends that were state troopers were killed in line of duty that day. The judge, and then Dennis Jones, who is, he was an editor for the News and Sentinel, had tried to stop the rampage. And, the guy that killed him just told him he should have minded his own business and shot him dead. So, but that's the kind of guy we dealt with. He set up another ambush for troopers, or he set up the trooper car parked. He took his shirt and he put it over the steering wheel, like maybe he had committed suicide. And then he set up an ambush on the side hill. And the group that went down there that day had a canine. And the canine alerted on the side hill before they got into that killing zone that he had set up. So the canine sprung the trap a little early, so the gunfight ensued where he didn't want it to ensue. But he was still able to wound 2 others. A border patrol and a state trooper were wounded in that gun encounter. And then when they were coming down to be rescued by another group, they engaged him again on the side hill, and he was killed with a slug to the head and a .308 M14. So, and they couldn't tell you who killed him because it was probably simultaneously, because, one would have dropped him and he would have been done, but there was bullet holes in there, both fatal shots. So, but he was killed right there after he set up another ambush. Thank God for that canine who alerted on that side hill, or we would have had, numerous fatalities there again. If they'd got probably, 20, 30 more feet into that, killing zone where he had set up. So I guess that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's really intense. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. I don't know if I share that, but did they know the motive of the guy? Like, or was he just
he was kind of the prelude to the sovereign citizen, free stater, so to speak. He had some problems with the judge was also a local selectman. He had done some work. He lived on the Connecticut River. He'd done some work there, created some riffraff illegally. He was in process of being addressed that through the state. Wasn't paying his taxes, had an assessment on his property. So his wife had died a few years before, which a lot of people think maybe was a trigger for him. I wish I could tell you a certain thing. He didn't like law enforcement that day that it happened. Those troopers he had a piece of junk truck that he drove around and they were going to pull his plates off. And they had stopped him to do that. And that's when he engaged him with an AR-15. So killing them both in a grocery store parking lot.
That's terrible. So what do you got shot in the badge? The badge obviously probably saved your life. What do you chalk 100%. That up to? Just fate, divine intervention, or how do you kind of reconcile that in your mind, I guess, all these years later?
Yeah, no, I have a great guardian angel, for sure. Definitely, I think it's funny you asked me how I reconcile it. And my wife just said it the other day because she hears me say it wasn't my time. And that's what I really had to grasp with, that it wasn't my time and it was their time. And when you hear about survivor's guilt, everybody, I think, if you have a near-death experience where others die or something and you think, what could I have done? I was a young guy. I didn't have a family. I'm like, I should have died, not those guys. I had survivor's guilt for sure. And that's a real thing when the critical incidents happen and stuff. So you start blaming yourself for not dying. But I really had to grasp hold of that it wasn't my time. And that's to this day. My wife says, when it's his time, it's his time. And I just kind of had to laugh that, all these years, I've made an impression on her for sure, because that's what I say. And, that's how I deal with death pretty much now, even though some of it's very difficult to deal with. I always think appointed unto man once to die, and after that, the judgment. We all have our day. And I think it's appointed, and I think it's your time. And that's how I cope with that type of thing, Christian. So good question.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I'm my wife kind of calls me like a coffee mug guy because I'm big on like quotes and stuff. And so I always say quotes. And one of the ones I was thinking about when you were saying that was like, it had to change somewhat your outlook on life in some sense, because it's like most men have two lives when they're born. And then when they realize they only have one. Right. And it's like, that's really, I don't know, that's really profound. Right. I mean, I could only imagine that would give you almost like a freedom to go live now. You're like, I probably shouldn't be here. Like I have this golden ticket to like go live my life,
Right. There's a reason that it wasn't my turn. It wasn't my time then. Someday it will be, am I supposed to accomplish something along the way here? Am I supposed to be on the Hunter's Advantage podcast to have some impact on somebody? Am I supposed to, try to help stop poaching? What is my mission? I don't know. I always have a goal, have a mission. And I hope someday I'll find out if I've completed it or not. But it certainly changes your outlook on life when you have a near-death experience. And it's funny because, all the adrenaline that I had in West Virginia and stuff, I think of what a young man, what I did and what I would do. And now I look back, I'm like, would I do that again now, knowing all this experience? And I probably would. But
Yeah.
You're right. When you find your mortality, it's a different life for you. When you learn that, hey, I've only got one life. So
Yeah, your wife is probably asking that as well. Like, yeah, you only got one, so why are you doing this?
Yeah.
I will tell you, my son does not want to be a game warden. I think he, growing up in it, dad was never home. I'd come through the door and the phone would ring and I'd be going right back out the door. So it's interesting that he has no desire whatsoever to be a game warden.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. I would be okay if he wanted to be a game warden, but it's interesting.
I would be the worst game warden ever. They'd be like, we got a guy here over here shooting off the road. I'd be like, all right, 30 minutes till dark. I got a big buck on camera. I'll be there in a little bit. Like I'd be the worst.
That is a good point. Because
Change your prey,
Yeah.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. Because I went to school for wildlife ecology, and just having wildlife in a degree name, I don't know how many people was like, oh, you're going to be a game warden? And at first I was like, it sounds pretty cool, but then you get to thinking about it, and it's like, well, their busy season is during deer season, and that's the time that I love, so probably not. But again, just kind of like you said, you just got to change up your prey a little bit.
Yep, and that 10-pointer is that poacher that you can mount on the wall, and those are my big bucks, or the guys that I caught that were hard to catch. You're always hunting too. It's you don't have a season, you're always hunting.
Yeah. Well, for the ethical hunter, you see it, like there's a lot of, I may call it meme content, call it just content in the internet in general, like hate kind of spirals to the top, but there's a lot of folks that really dislike game wardens. And for the ethical hunter, like I feel like that's the biggest partner in the fight that you could ever have.
100%.
I have people that, when I see the game warden, do I think, oh my God, did I buy my license? Like, yeah, there's a moment there, right? Even if it's in my pocket, I know.
Right. I get
yeah.
There's just like in Nebraska, it's like we get all the way down there, and it's literally the day before season opens, and we're like, oh shoot, we forgot to print out our tag, because in Nebraska you need a paper tag, and here in Oklahoma, like you just whip out your phone, digital, no problem. But there we didn't have a paper tag, so we were stressing trying to get that figured out. 16 hours from home, and right then, did we want a game warden? No, but the next day it was golden.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good relationships with hunters. I always enjoy my relationship with hunters. And then again, if you don't want to be friends with the game wardens, you don't have to be. That means there's probably some issue there. That's all I can think of, because we're generally, we're pretty good people. We don't, we have to deal with certain issues. We try to deal with them the best we can. But we're human too. So
I think the bad experiences of those folks that kind of have a justice complex, it's like the 1 out of 10 cops, right? You get pulled over 10 times, 9 of them are as nice as could be. If you left your license at home, they're like, cool, have your wife send a picture, we'll figure this out. But there's one that's like, really gets on your case. Have you seen or heard of any, kind of, I call it game wardens entering the dark side? Like do you have any cool stories, or I guess they're not cool, weird stories about abuse of power or anything like that in the game warden kind of space?
Personalities are different, and we have jerks. There's no doubt about it. And I can tell you jerk stories, tweak stories. I can't really tell you bad stories. I have never run into that guy that's like, dirty. But we've had bad game wardens, and we've had asshole game wardens, which doesn't help our reputation at all.
So not
asshole people, to be general too, to be honest with you.
So basically not crooked, just different personalities.
Yeah, they're pricks, and they treat people like they shouldn't be treated. And especially, as a trainee, and I had to tolerate that. And yeah, that wasn't good. It doesn't help me to be training with a guy that's a jerk that, torments hunters and torments sportsmen when there's no the only reason you're doing it is just to be an asshole. And those are game wardens, believe me. That one got fired, thank God. But there's others that I always say, one of the game wardens, I love to have a beer with him, but I hate working with him in uniform because he's a prick. Yeah. And I don't really like working with him. and I've pulled rank on it sometimes when I was working with him. So just because it wasn't, we were going down the road we didn't need to go.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of any dirty warden stories. I always used to hear back in the day that the game wardens were just a big bunch of poachers, and maybe in the 40s and 50s, I'm not sure, they did hire some poachers that were notorious. Did those guys kill deer? I don't know. I don't have any facts on that. There are stories. Those, it seems to be always a little bit of truth to rumor. I've always found that out. So, I don't think anybody would ever say that Wayne Saunders was a poacher, but they might say, I've heard stories about the guys in the 40s and stuff that, would fill their freezer with deer before they started pinching everybody else. And that was a different era too, when people actually used a lot of wild game to feed their families. I remember one story when the game warden stopped by and said, "Hey, you've killed enough deer." So, and they've had, 3 or 4 already killed, and they were like, okay, and they never tagged any of those. They had them in the well. So I don't know if this is the next generation telling me these stories, that they had, 4 deer hanging in the well, and the game warden seemed to know. Yeah, you're done this year. You got your deer to feed the family. Okay. So, and that was probably a thing back there. They probably looked the other way so people could survive when there wasn't a lot of food. It was an easier food source. This day and age, I had a roadkill list. I'd fill poachers' freezers. So one of my, newer guys were like, why do you give to that guy who's a poacher? I said, if I fill his freezer now, do you think he's going to poach to fill it? He's like, oh, that's a good point. I'm like, yeah, so we'll give him all the roadkill. We'll fill his freezer. He doesn't have the need to poach anymore. So that was my philosophy. If his freezer wasn't full, would he try to fill it? That guy would have. So I tried to fill his freezer, and I think he appreciated that. So maybe he wasn't going to poach, because I did have a talk with one guy one time. I'm like, hey, if you ever want another roadkill, I don't even want you to even come close to the line. Okay. And he got a lot of roadkill, and he was like, okay. I'm like, we understand each other, correct? And I never had another problem with him. So sometimes it's just the way you talk to people, and what's important here. Is it important for you to go out and try to fill your freezer with a firearm illegally, or is it important for me to give you a call and say, hey, I got a roadkill moose here, you want to come get it and fill the freezer?
Yeah. I feel like it'd be easier to have compassion upon people doing it out of necessity, right? But I know, as a deer hunter who travels, it's the most expensive meat on the planet. I have a $200 camera to kill a deer, and all this gear and stuff traveling. But
100%.
Speaking on kind of it's probably conspiracy theory. It's probably just my brain. I like to, that's just where my brain goes, and I think the thing that is most interesting to me from like a warden doing something or abusing power is like someone out in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, where there's one game warden in a county, right? And there's very few residents in a county. And so it's like kind of like martial law in a sense. Like, you can go do what you want, and you're probably not going to get caught either way. That's the kind of the situations that I think about. And honestly, it'd probably be hard to find stories like that, but I like to think, oh man, there's somewhere out there, someone with power is doing something weird with it, right?
I think you're watching too much Yellowstone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess I don't know those guys. The guys I know
they're not going to be hanging out with you.
Exactly. Exactly. So, and some people would perceive me as a prick at times. Because I could be very assertive at times.
I mean,
very to the
you drive
point.
your own mother a ticket, so I get it.
Exactly. And I wrote, I gave letters of no trespass to a guy the day before moose season, so he couldn't actually guide on a lot of the property he was. That was probably a prep move, but it wasn't intentional. It was more so a convenience that I knew where he was going to be the day before moose season. Hindsight, I shouldn't have done that. But yeah, so that was a prick move, and it really wasn't intentional to be a prick. It was just it was more convenience for me, because I wasn't going to drive 3 hours to serve him. I knew he was going to come to me, and I'd serve him right before moose season. And did that have a shock and awe effect? Absolutely had a shock and awe effect. Did I know that? Absolutely. I knew that was going to have a shock and awe effect. No. Did I want that? Yeah, I did. So I wanted to make my point.
I love it.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm not doing the round trip. Here you go.
Yeah. It is sometimes. I mean, when you don't have to drive, it's convenient. But yeah,
I get it. Just shifting a little bit, and I don't think you've mentioned it yet. You were actually on a TV show.
the Outdoor Channel just released Game Warden Files, and my shooting that I just talked to you about was the premiere show on that show on the Outdoor Channel that does started February 14th. So they have the Game Warden Case Files. They just started. So that one, I was on Northwood's Law. I wasn't the young, good-looking guy that they always followed around. I was the lieutenant, usually giving the orders and telling them where to go. So
yeah, but
several
he wouldn't
cases.
join us, so that's why we.
I could have got the young, good-looking game warden here for you.
Yeah. Sorry, people watching.
Yeah, for sure.
How did that go about? Like, how did they basically approach you guys or your office and be like, hey, we think it'd be a cool idea to film the act. Would you guys be interested?
They actually started in Maine. So Northwood's Law started in Maine, and they basically shadowed the game wardens in Maine. And it was really popular. And then it got shut down by the governor. I think it was over perceived. He said it was portraying Maine residents in a negative way. I don't know if it was doing that or not. I don't really think that. So, but politics got involved. So Northwood's Law shut down in Maine, and they came to New Hampshire because we were so similar to Maine as far as what we did. So Maine and New Hampshire are one of the only few states that we are responsible for search and rescue. That's one of our duties. In New Hampshire, we have the White Mountains of New Hampshire, which is it's hiked. We have no trees over 4,000 feet in a lot of our spots. So it's deemed the worst weather in the world. We have the record wind speed on top of Mount Washington. I believe it's 212 miles an hour. So there's actually a weather station on top of Mount Washington that's manned. And we're known as the world's worst weather. And a lot of trees don't grow over 4,000 feet up there. So that's unique to Maine and New Hampshire that we do search and rescue. So they came to New Hampshire and we started doing the same show that they did in Maine. I said to the producer, Ben Shank, first of all, they came there, they had Maine stickers all over their cameras. I'm like, you guys got to get those Maine stickers off here in New Hampshire. In the day one, we had, all kinds of things going on. They were on the mountaintop with us on Mount Washington for a search and rescue mission. And I kept saying, do you ever get this in Maine? Did you ever see this in Maine? And they were like, no. So we were pretty unique in that manner. It was actually kind of cool. It was really weird and awkward at first, but you get used to the camera and the camera guys, and it was just like normal, if you can believe that. It just, after, a couple weeks of them shadowing you, you get used to it. The people that you were interacting with didn't get used to it, but you got used to it. It was pretty cool. Eric Fluette, I remember it was a rainy Tuesday and he had the film crew, and it was when they first started. And I said, Eric, what are you going to do with a film crew on a day like today? And he's like, oh, I'm going to go up. I got some fisher to seal, some otter to seal, trappers, I'm going to seal fur, and we're going to do that. I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. So on his way north, it was rainy, and he actually checked a fisherman and a few other people there, and they got him on film checking the fishermen. Well, lo and behold, we would do a drowning later that day of the same fisherman that he checked. So took a canoe down the river in a rapid area without a life jacket, capsized and drowned. So the premiere of Northwood's Law in New Hampshire was me, Eric, a lot of it about that drowning and dealing with that drowning. Which
wow,
it was really, because you guys can, I'm a pretty happy-go-lucky guy, and when I'm out of uniform and when I'm not working, I'm hanging out with friends, and I had a lot of friends call me and go, "Hey Wayne, is that real? Is that show real, or is that made up?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" They're like, "You were so serious," and I'm like, "It's a serious job. You guys always see me out of uniform and not interacting. And that I have a real serious job. And yeah, I'm a happy-go-lucky guy. Out of uniform, I like to have fun. But no, that's real to life. And that's what I do day in and day out. And that show exposed what we do and how we do it. And that was the great thing about it, that people just saw that. There was a book, Where You Will Find Me, Kate Matrasova Froze to Death. I'm Not Adams. I was in charge of that search and rescue mission. And people would read that book and they were like, holy crap, we didn't realize, what you guys dealt with for search and rescue missions in the White Mountains in New Hampshire after reading that book. And I'm like, yeah, no, it's a real, and it's a hard job. It's a tough job physically for the guys on the ground, for the lieutenants emotionally, logistically, dealing with, families and, people that are, you got to do a death notification to a family.
The Hunter's Advantage podcast is brought to you by Numa Outdoors. Growing up, I remember waddling around the woods looking like the Michelin Man and still freezing my butt off. But thanks to Numa Outdoors, those days are over. It's not just about staying warm. When I go out hunting, I need to know that I have gear for every single thing the woods might throw at me, whether it's heat or rain or cold. Numa Outdoors offers quality gear for every pursuit. If you're looking for quality garments backed by a lifetime warranty, make sure to go to NumaOutdoors.com and use code HA20 for 20% off at checkout. Whether we're chasing whitetails here in the South or we're headed out west to get after some bugling bulls, we trust Numa Outdoors and we hope you will too.
That sucks. And, I certainly have a passion for those people, because I can understand losing a loved one. And I put a lot of time into that because I had a lot of critical incident training because of my shooting. So I actually have a lot of compassion for those people and took a lot of extra time in doing those death notifications. The thing with death notifications now with social media, it's a race. And where we used to actually go physically do it, sometimes we have to do it over the phone now because we're scared that it's going to hit Facebook before we can tell, this guy, his wife that he's passed, or, the family that their son or daughter is drowned. It is a rush. I mean, one day it was a physical race. So we had a drowning victim and I'm literally walking up to give the notification to the family. I see this woman and she's walking and she is visibly trying to get past us and walk. And all of a sudden I said, excuse me, ma'am, are you and she just breaks into a run and starts yelling, they found him, he's dead. I was like, oh my goodness. And that's how that family found out. That woman were yelling and screaming, they found him, he's dead. Before we could get up there and sit them down and tell. So yeah, it was horrible. Sometimes people are just people are just crazy. Oh,
who was that woman? Was it a reporter or something, or a friend of the family, or
a lay person, probably a neighbor or something? Yeah. So it was I think it was a neighbor, but you could visibly tell because we had just recovered his body, and me and I think that maybe even the colonel was coming up to do it with me, and we were just walking up the street to their house, and visibly saw her, trying to walk fast and get past us. And I started doing that, she starts yelling and running because for some reason she wanted to be the first one to tell them.
Yeah, like that means something. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's not the way I want to find out. And it's hard. Like I said, sometimes we have to do it over the phone now because we're scared that social media is going to put it out there before we can tell them, which isn't actually the way we like to. It's not the way we've been trained all these years, but things have evolved, so we have to do things differently in order to do it timely.
That makes sense. So when you guys are like approaching people with like a camera crew and stuff, you said people get super uncomfortable with that. Like what are those interactions typically like? Like, did I do something super wrong? Why are you filming this? Or what?
After a while, people got used to it, and I swear some people committed crimes just to be on camera.
Like, it's me.
Exactly.
Come on.
Yeah, I swear. Sometimes I think we got confessions just because they were on camera. But yeah, it's an interesting interaction with people. They seem to accept it, and then they have to sign waivers after if they want to actually be on TV. So the camera crew will go back and have them sign waivers so they can use their face. If not, they just fuzz the face on it. So you'll see a lot of episodes with fuzz faces that that was good content. They just didn't get a waiver from them, so they fuzz their face. No big deal. Yeah, it's people still have to interact with us. We're checking fishing licenses. We're doing investigations. We're running decoys. So yeah, all the above. They became part of the family. I had them over here for dinner. Yeah, they hung out at the house. I got pictures with the whole Northwoods Law film crew in my living room after dinner. We took them up to a nostalgic historical hunting camp where we basically had Thanksgiving dinner. We had like 24 people, I think, that time with the camera crew, game wardens. Very historic spot. It was really cool. Those guys today are still, some of them are still friends. So, and they're actually filming a YouTube channel. So they came back. Engel Entertainment has now got the guys wearing body cameras and stuff, and they're starting to take that. So there'll be a YouTube channel coming out based on New Hampshire Fish and Game off of the Northwoods Law program. So that'll be coming out here shortly. So
that's cool. Other than
do you think shows like that kind of pulling back the curtain? Do you think they allow people to have like a more realistic and have more empathy and understanding for people that are just trying to do their job on the other side? Do you think they serve like a pretty good purpose, or is it purely entertainment?
No, I think they do serve a purpose. I think our whole culture has shifted. So, probably our grandparents were very attuned to the outdoors. They didn't have video games. They didn't have things to keep them inside. They were hunters. They were fishermen, and they knew the game warden. So where I was a game warden, you pounded on someone's door and they answered the door and you had your Stetson on. They filled their pants. Not so much if you're down in a populated area. They kind of relate you with the normal policemen, and they don't even understand what your jobs or duties are when you go to their house. So I think these shows bridged that to that community that had no longer had exposure to the game warden. Now, small rural communities, for sure, I think have those connections. Because we're part of the community. Well, we probably created the word community policing because that's what we're about. We're teaching hunter education, we're teaching trapper education, we're integrating with the community. If there's a town forest, they sometimes want input from us. Always we're helping out the local police officers. We're integrating into that community. If you're small enough, they know you. My neighbors knew me well. They could call me up. So where the larger population, you lose that contact. You lose that rural connection, I'm going to call it, which is great. I love it. Some of the best information I got was from, making those connections that you would have never got any other way. My lieutenant, again, always wanted me, hey, did you stop at the store and get a coffee here? Did you stop at this farmer's? Did you stop? And I kept thinking to myself as a young game warden, hey, I'm catching poachers here. I don't have time to go visiting with everybody. But what he was trying to do is have me make those connections in that rural society. And some of the best information, once they got comfortable with me, came from those people, that farmer or that coffee shop, that local filling station where I had to get, my oil changed for my cruiser. Once you start building those relationships, sometimes information would flow a whole lot freer than if they don't have that connection. And that's kind of rural life, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So how do you think, just from your connections and all that, like, how do you think the public could play, what are the ways the public played a bigger role, in either conservation, or what's your thought? I know I didn't ask that question very well, but my brain does that sometimes where I would have been that guy running for his wallet in the truck is my brain right now. But talking about the TV show and how it kind of, pulled back the curtain. And I know I was in my own little world just now, but like it kind of opens up, the public's eye, like the viewer's perspective. And are there some ways that you've seen, just based off of that show that, maybe urged the public to play, the bigger role in helping conservation as a whole? I know this is kind of like a 10,000-foot question, but, whether that be, throwing in tips more or helping out when they can.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about, the tip programs. Because a report, wildlife crime, you could do it anonymously. Every state has a way to report those things, whether it's a phone number, being able to text, being able to go on the computer and put that stuff down. And it all can be done anonymously if you don't want to be, engaged. A lot of tip programs have rewards that go with them. Most of the people that I interact with don't want the rewards. They just want to stop. And like I said, some of the information has come from very close relatives to people too, that don't want to let people know that they just ratted on their brother or their sister, but they want the poaching to stop because they see the environmental impact that it's happening. And I think sportsmen on the whole are very conscientious of the outdoors, and they want to be members of the NWTF, the
National Deer Association. Yeah,
National Deer Association. They want to be a part of the solution. Even some of the bad guys, they you'll find that they are members of these groups. And
that's crazy. I love the wild turkey. That's why I poach them.
Yeah. And I swear that's the number one poached animal because the evidence is not there. So I think turkeys are poached with far more than you ever think they are. I think they're the number one target birds. Just like when Ron set up on that barway, that guy went in, he killed a turkey, came out. He didn't tag it. He just threw it in the back of the car. Never got checked by a game warden. Never had intentions of tagging that. Still had his tag. Continued to hunt. How many times does that happen? I think a lot. Yeah. So it's very, very important. Maybe some of the tickets I wouldn't write. So I had a guy with an 8-point buck. He was dragging out of the woods. He forgot to tag it. First deer ever. Nice buck. And then he realized he didn't tag it. He thought he was going to lose his deer. The guy that forgot to tag the 8-point buck isn't my target guy. The guy that's dragging out the yearling deer without a tag on it, or a doe without a tag on it, that's probably the guy I'm going to write a ticket to and not have anything. Because those are the types of things that, hey, I throw them in the trunk and I can go home and eat them and I'll have another tag for another day. The guy that has the big buck usually and is excited about it, it isn't my target guy. That guy was so excited he forgot to tag his deer. Happens. Seen it numerous times. Am I going to write him for an untagged deer? No. I think I wrote him a warning. Hey, just in the future, tag your deer. That's what you're supposed to do immediately upon killing. Tag it. So, am I going to take your deer? Absolutely not. So, and again, it's learning that and finding out where those types of people are and interpreting. I call it that sixth sense. I'm a firm believer in that sixth sense. And if your hair stands up on the back of your head, believe it. Just accept it because it can save your life for sure. It's just something about it. If you think there's something wrong, there's something wrong. And I've always believed that. And when I find in investigations, if I think something's wrong, I start digging. And 99% of the time, there is something wrong. And it starts all with that body language.
It's awesome to talk about it. Just kind of get this, kind of behind the scenes perspective. But obviously you're retired now. You're kind of maybe you were off the television circuit per se. What is kind of post career life look for you now? I mean, you involved in some other projects, still trying to catch folks, or what are you up to?
I am still trying to catch poachers. So one of the things I did as an officer, I ran our Operation Game Thief program in New Hampshire. And I started by learning about how to get tips and stuff through a organization called International Wildlife Crimestoppers. So I've been involved with International Wildlife Crimestoppers since like 2008. Been very much a part of it, learned a lot from it, built our whole reporter poaching program based on the stuff I learned there. So now I'm their executive director. So we do, we just came up with we're working with Wise Eye cameras. We're going to do a grant for 100 cameras to law enforcement agencies across the nation. So we'll be able to use those. Hopefully they catch some poachers. We build tip trailers. So these trailers that you see at events, whether it's a fair or a school, or that tells you how to turn in poachers. Very important. We build those across the nation. We built one in Indiana last year. We're going to build one in Virginia this year. So we're constantly doing that. We work with Guidefitter. Guidefitter is one of our strategic partners. We do an Officer of the Year, and Guidefitter's involved in that, in the selection process, as well as Guidefitter gives them $1,000 to spend on the Guidefitter, area. So they can go in Guidefitter and spend $1,000, and they help us with honoring that Officer of the Year, which is pretty cool in itself. So, and then I just started this project this year. It's called Certified Ethics Pledge. So, and there's the seal up there for you. So, and I was telling you guys earlier, my friends, when they were going to go hunting somewhere else, would always call me and say, "Hey, can you call the local game warden and see who he thinks we should hunt with?" Because they don't want to go with a bad guide outfitter. They don't want to put themselves in that position. So I would call the local game warden, whether I knew him or not, to say, "Hey, it's Wayne Saunders from New Hampshire. I got some friends going down there. Can you give me a suggestion for some guides to use?" And they would give me, half dozen, 3 or 4, whatever that they thought. They would never just give me one. They would always make sure they gave me several. And those were the guys that my friends would always go with. So I was like, not everybody is willing to do that or has a friend that will do that. So I'm like, let's cut that out and let's, take those guides, outfitters, people that do business in the outdoors, and let's create a ethics pledge. So a very simple pledge that basically, they're going to obey the rules. They're going to report wildlife violations, and they're going to help prevent wildlife crime by taking the pledge. They're going to do that. So essentially, they take the pledge. We list them on our website so people can go there and see who's taking the pledge, and then, find a guide or outfitter or a business that they want to do business with, or just even the general public. We've got a couple podcasters on there. And then we give them this seal. We give it to them digitally so they can put it on their website. We're going to be working with Hunt Regs here pretty soon. So they're going to be listing them on the Hunt Regs app, which is another huge success for wildlife crime stopping. Those guys have done a great thing. They started a report of poaching program. One of my passions when I wanted to take this over was to create an app where you could report poaching in. Well, guess what? That's a very expensive thing. They told me to budget $130,000. Yeah, we don't have $130,000. So they built a report of poaching program into their app. And the state of Georgia has just started using it last fall for the first time. Great success. The state of Maine has just put it on board. So they're going to start to use it. South Carolina has just come on board. So these guys aren't charging the states for this report of poaching program. It's pretty awesome. So I'm very happy with that. I'm very proud of the work that International Wildlife Crimestoppers has done with Hunt Regs and that. And we're just getting started. Hopefully this is going to go across all 50 states and hopefully the Canadian provinces, which is why International Crimestoppers is international, because we include the Canadian provinces into our organization. So that's why I think this, the certified ethics pledge is so important for everybody to do their part. We're the only nonprofit that benefits wildlife law enforcement in a totality. Certainly, that you can benefit your state. Some of the chapters benefit the states, but we're the only group that, as a group, benefits North America, which is kind of unique. I was looking at the model, the North American model at the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation dinner one time in Maine. And I'm staring at this pie chart, and they have, how much they do for conservation land and how much biology they do. And it's a big pie chart. And I'm just staring at it. And the president walks up to me and he's like, "You've been looking at that a long time." He goes, "What's wrong with it?" I said, "There isn't a pie piece for law enforcement." And I said, "I appreciate everything that they do, but without law enforcement, none of that is successful. And vice versa too. I'm not taking their show without our biologists. We're not successful. Without the land management, we're not successful. But they're not successful without the rules and regulations being enforced, because they can make all the rules and regulations to manage these animal populations, but without teeth in the game, they're not effective. So we are the teeth in the game, and I'm very happy to say Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation is now, a strategic partner with International Wildlife Crimestoppers. Another huge success story there. Now they have a piece of that pie chart that is contributing to law enforcement. So on a whole different level. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think the work that you're doing matters. I think the service you've had to the game that we love to chase through your whole career is awesome, and we appreciate you doing it. And for people that we appreciate you doing the podcast too, by the way. It was really fun to do your show, and it's fun to have you on. For people that want to maybe keep up with you, what you're doing with the Certified Ethics Pledge and, the International Stop and Poaching, where can people check out your podcast, and then where can people go to check out that sort of stuff?
So the podcast is Warden's Watch podcast, and I'm everywhere with podcasts. YouTube channel, Warden's Watch podcast, website's wardenswatch.com. The reason it's named the Warden's Watch is because I used to hear all the time, "Oh, I've never been checked by a game warden." And I always say, yeah, you've probably, never been checked by a game warden, but I bet you've been watched. Because we don't have to check everybody. We can get out our binoculars and kind of determine sometimes that we probably don't need to check them, or how many fish they've caught, or if they're catching and releasing. We spend a ton of time behind our binoculars. So that's why I named it Warden's Watch, because that's what we're doing. We're watching. So I think that's very good thing. I like watching people, and I always like saying that. Yep. You may have not been checked, but you've been watched. I can almost guarantee it.
I'll never pee in the woods again.
Yeah. Well, that goes for cameras anyway. So
yeah,
that is true. Well,
and then with International Wildlife Crimestoppers, it's wildlifecrimestoppers.org is our website. The pledge is right there. You click on the pledge, it'll bring you right to the spot where you can take that pledge. So, and it's for anybody. If you want to help stop wildlife crime and take the pledge, we're going to send you that certificate. We're going to send you a decal. We're going to give you it digitally if you want to use it on your websites and things. And I would be proud of that. I'd be very proud of that. And I would appreciate it too, that everybody contributes to helping stop wildlife crime.
Absolutely.
Well, Wayne, you were the very first game warden we've ever had on the podcast. We've had our fair share of poachers, but you're the first. And
you have.
We love you. We have. And we love that you are very passionate about what you do. And not only thanks for joining us, but, thanks for everything that you do to help conservation.
Yeah. Well, I love that you guys are hard chargers. You're young. You guys are passionate. I've been watching some of your stuff and listening to some of your stuff, and your passion comes through just as much. And I think that's why you're successful, is people can relate to you, because you're not these big famous people coming in. You're two guys, get it done, and you understand the average hunter, and you're giving them information, and you're one of them. Which I think is so important, and I really appreciate what you're doing. You guys are killing it, and you're doing a great job, and thank you for what you do.